now. Give it 1 second. Okay. You guys are good to go. All loss will be at 101. Have a good round, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone. We are ready to get started. So we're going to call the case of the estates of Genesis Petrillo versus Peony Estates and Harper Martini. My name is Judge Erica Oates. Scoring judge, if you can look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen, make sure to keep your audio and video off unless you're told otherwise. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. So the only people on the screen should be the advocates and me. Can the attorneys please make appearances? If everyone can just introduce themselves, that'd be great.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
I'm Gabe Johnson, and with me today will be Taryn Scott.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And Sarah Quinlivan.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And we will be representing the estate of Ms. Petrillo.
Okay, great. And from the defense?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Anna Fortunato, and along with my co-counsel, Christina St. John.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And McKenna Fitzsimmons.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We represent the defense in today's case.
Okay, great. So just so everyone knows, this is a new format for all of us. So if you experience any difficulties, please let me know. I'm very open and flexible. So if you experience those, please just, flag me, let me know so we can handle them. Are we ready for opening statements or do we have any housekeeping matters?
Your Honor, we do have a few pre-trial matters.
Please.
So first, we'd like to ask for permission to show exhibits of evidence by sharing our screens with your permission.
Absolutely.
Secondly, we'd like to point your attention to stipulation 3, which states that exhibits 1 through 10 are pre-admitted.
Okay, great.
And finally, we'd like to invoke Rule 615, which states that all witnesses except for party representatives are constructively sequestered.
Absolutely granted.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's it for us.
Great. Anything from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Just to start, we have a little note that due to our university's mask policy, all attorneys during the case in chief will be needing to wear masks. However, witnesses giving testimony as well as attorneys giving speeches will be in their own separate rooms, so they do not need to be wearing a mask.
Great. And I am happy to accommodate whatever makes everyone comfortable. If you feel more comfortable wearing a mask, that's fine with me. I won't judge any differently if you are or not.
Thank you, Your Honor. Additionally, we would also like to constructively invoke Rule 615, which is the constructive, or 603, that's the constructive swearing in of all witnesses.
Sure.
Thank you, Your Honor. And lastly, we would like to ask your preferences on when we should put the exhibits on the screen. Would you like that while we're starting the process of admission or after the exhibit has already been admitted?
Let's do while we're starting the process, just so that I can have that on my screen, just in case there are any issues that arise.
Thank you, Your Honor. With that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Great. All right. If we could hear opening statements from the plaintiff, that'd be great.
Good morning, Your Honor. Permission to adjust my computer?
Absolutely.
May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. You're going to hear about a young woman, Genesis Petrillo, who died the day of her wedding. The defendant, Harper Martini, cares about two things: her business and her only child, Casey Soto. And you will see that a mother's love knows no bounds. It's 2019. Genesis and Casey have been dating for 6 years. Genesis just finished graduate school. She is loving and she is supportive of Casey. But then you'll also hear that there were problems. Genesis was going to take Casey across the world and away from the defendant. The couple do not expect the happiest day of their life to tragically plunder. Tragic because a mother's love knows no bounds. It's June 7th, 2019, the night of the rehearsal dinner. The defendant gives Genesis a bottle of Carl wine. Genesis drinks that wine and then dies the next day around 9:27 a.m., her wedding day. As the plaintiff, we will prove by the preponderance of the evidence that the defendant poisoned Genesis Petrillo and the poison caused death. But we will also tell you why. And it's because a mother's love knows no bounds. First, you will hear from Angel Rodriguez, a friend of Casey and Genesis, who was at the wedding and the hospital when Genesis died. You will hear that the defendant gave Genesis a bottle of Cara wine, and that Ms. Rodriguez saw the defendant carrying pesticide. She will tell you that she saw Genesis drink from the bottle of Cara wine given to her by the defendant. You will also know from Dr. Jamin Kwan, Chief Emergency Physician at River Valley Hospital here in Midlands. Dr. Kwan examined Genesis the night he was poisoned by pesticide, and he will conclude that Genesis in fact died from organophosphates. Finally, you will hear from Danny Francasio, the defendant's previous employer and former confidant, that the defendant knew pesticides to be dangerous and that pesticides could hurt people. And you will hear from Ms. Francasio about the defendant's disgust towards Genesis. By the end of today's trial, you will see that a mother's love knows no bounds. Me and my counsel, Sarah Quinlivan, will ask you to find the defendant liable of battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. If we could hear an opening statement from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
It all comes back to Angel. June 7th of 2019 was the night of Casey and Genesis's rehearsal dinner. They were a young couple ready to stand in front of all their friends and family and promise to spend the rest of their lives together. But instead of walking down the aisle, Genesis spent the next morning in the hospital, taking her last breaths. The question before us today is, who put Genesis in the hospital? And to answer that question, you need to know the last person Genesis was with that night. The evidence will show that that person was Angel Rodriguez. You see, Angel was one of Genesis's best friends. From the moment they met, they were inseparable. They did everything together, including spending the night of the rehearsal together after everyone else went to bed. You see, that night when all the guests left after Casey Soto went to bed, the two of them stayed behind. And together they drank shot after shot after shot of tequila. Today, you will hear from 3 witnesses who will tell you what happened on June 7th of 2019. First, you will hear from Austin Lewis, an employee at Peony Estates. She will tell you how pesticides were stored there. You will hear how there was almost no restrictions on access to pesticides. There was no lock on the shed. There was no requirement for employees to sign bottles out of the shed or sign them in. And there's no record kept of the amount of pesticide in storage before or after each use. Because of that, there's no way to know who used the pesticide, how much pesticide was used, or when it was used. She will tell you that anyone at Peony Estates, even people who didn't work there, had access to the pesticides. Next, you'll hear from Dr. Cannon, an expert in medicine, pharmacology, and toxicology. She will tell you how she analyzed the facts in today's case and developed an independent report regarding the death of Genesis Petrillo. She will testify that it is impossible to determine where the pesticides in Genesis's system came from. You see, they tested the bottle of wine, but the results of this test were inconclusive because the wine bottle was thrown in a trash can where pesticide bottles had already been thrown out. But you know what they didn't test? You're going to hear that night after the rehearsal dinner, when Genesis stayed behind and drank that bottle of tequila with Angel, the tequila bottle was never found. It was never tested. Finally, you will hear from Harper Martini, the defendant in today's case. She will tell you how her daughter Casey was her whole world, and she only ever wanted what was best for her. Her first and only priority was making sure that Casey was happy and loved and safe. She's going to explain to you how on the day of the rehearsal dinner, she wanted to make amends with Genesis. She wanted Casey to know that Harper would do anything to make her happy. Even if it meant letting her do something Harper didn't feel was in Casey's best interest. You will hear how she bottled a special wine to offer Genesis as a peace offering. And you will also hear that Angel Rodriguez was the last person she saw with Genesis that night. You see, that night after the rehearsal dinner, when Genesis and Angel were together drinking that tequila, Harper realized she forgot her jacket. And she walked back into the space of the rehearsal dinner and she found Angel and Genesis together. She'll tell you that she walked in on them sharing a passionate, intimate moment in that bottle of tequila. Your Honor, all roads lead back to Angel. And you'll see that all of these unanswered questions, the when, the where, the how, none of them will be answered by the end of today's case. The plaintiff has the burden of proof in today's case. They have to prove to you that it is more likely than not that Harper Martini intentionally put the pesticides in the bottle of wine, and they are not going to be able to meet that burden. For that reason, we ask you to find Harper Martini not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. All right. Before plaintiff calls its first witness, I will ask everyone to switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. That will allow you to see the attorneys and the witnesses at the same time. Is the plaintiff ready to call its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
Great.
Your Honor, can you hear and see me okay?
I can, absolutely.
Right. May I proceed?
You may.
Morning. Please state your name for the members of the jury.
Good morning. My name is Angel Rodriguez.
What do you do for a living?
I am a kindergarten teacher at Rapid River Valley Elementary School in Rapid River Valley, Midlands.
When you're not teaching, what do you do on your free time?
Oh, I love to garden, and I'm a huge history buff. So I like to go down to the local bar Chuggies with my trivia team.
Who's on your trivia team?
So we have Drew Matsukos, he's our science guy, and then we have Casey, who's our sports guy, and then we also have Genesis, and she does the arts and literature, and I am, of course, your token history buff.
Ms. Rodriguez, what is your relationship like with Drew, Genesis, and Casey?
They're my very best friends. I would do anything for them. And when I found out Casey and Genesis were getting married, I was ecstatic for them.
Were you part of the wedding?
Yes, I was included in their wedding party. I actually got to help them plan the wedding at Rosie and Pedro's.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, do you know the defendant in today's case, Harper Martini?
Yes, that's Casey's mom.
And what is your relationship like with the defendant?
I didn't know them too well at the beginning. We had only met once or twice before the wedding planning process, but I got to know them better through the course of that wedding planning process when all the plans were changed with the addition of Harper Martini to the wedding party.
What do you mean when you say all the plans were changed?
For instance, the venue was changed from Rosie and Pedro's to Peony Estates, which is Harper's business. And she also brought in a wedding planner, even though we had already had the wedding planned out. And it was fine the way it was.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, I'd like to direct your attention to June 7th, 2019, the night of the rehearsal dinner before the wedding. How did this dinner start?
It was not good. There was nonstop fighting between Genesis and Harper. At one point, I even saw Harper say to Genesis, "You should leave and save this family the headache. Otherwise, I will make you disappear."
What happened after this comment was said?
Genesis was understandably upset and went to confront Harper about it. And I saw Harper roughly pull Genesis's arm into the hallway and drag her.
Did you talk to Genesis after this occurred?
I did. I asked Genesis if she was all right, and Genesis said to keep away from Harper. I'm afraid Harper is going to kill me if I'm not careful.
As to hearsay statements of Genesis Petrillo.
I'm sorry, counsel, I think we may have missed the mute button on that. I saw you object, but I didn't hear it.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay of the statements of Genesis Petrillo.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Now, this statement falls under one of the exceptions of hearsay, which is the belief under intimate death. As Genesis Petrillo was leaving the confrontation with Harper Martini, Genesis truly felt like if she was not careful, Harper might have killed her. So this is a statement under the belief of imminent death.
Counsel, do you have any response?
Yes, Your Honor. I disagree with the characterization of Genesis's feelings. I do not believe this falls under that exception. Genesis did not truly believe he was in harm's way. Rather, this was an exaggeration, and therefore it does not fall under this exception.
I'm going to allow it, but I will weigh it appropriately.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to re-ask the question. What happened after the interaction between Genesis and Harper occurred in the hallway?
After Genesis came back, I asked Genesis what had happened, and Genesis said that to keep away from Harper. I'm afraid Harper is going to kill me if I'm not careful.
Ms. Rodriguez, did you ever see the defendant again that night?
I did a bit later. About an hour before dinner, I saw Harper in the hallway, and she was carrying a can that was labeled pesticide, and she appeared to be walking in the direction of the kitchen. It's odd enough.
Did you ask the defendant why she was carrying that can of pesticide?
I did. It didn't make sense why she'd be carrying a can of pesticide at a wedding, but Harper said it is for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest.
Ms. Rodriguez, did this relationship between Genesis and Harper ever change throughout the night?
Interestingly enough, it did. Later in the night, Harper actually made a toast to Genesis and presented her with this beautiful bottle of Caro wine, and it surprised us all.
Why did this surprise you?
Because the rest of the wedding party got bottles of Horizon.
Ms. Rodriguez, did you see Genesis drink from this bottle of Caro wine?
Yes, Genesis drank from the bottle multiple times through the night and had many glasses.
Do you know if anyone else drank from the Caro wine?
I actually had a sip, but I spit it out because it tasted so bad. That was the worst wine I've ever tasted.
And Ms. Rodriguez, did you see Genesis drink anything else throughout the night?
No, I did not.
Oh, what happened after you and Genesis stopped drinking?
Later that night, around 11 p.m., Genesis got up to dance, and Genesis was not acting like herself. She was swaying, and she had a total lack of coordination compared to what I've seen. I've seen her drink this much before without getting as little as a hangover. So I was really concerned about Genesis.
You voiced your concerns to Genesis?
I did. Genesis said that they wanted to dance more, but I disagreed and I put them up to bed because I didn't want anything bad to happen to them.
What happened when you went upstairs?
Once we got upstairs, that's where things got worse. Genesis started sweating and vomiting profusely, and I tried to give her some water, but she couldn't swallow it without spitting it out immediately. I was incredibly worried, and she was getting worse at alarming speed. The last thing Genesis said to me was to call 911.
You call 911?
I did. When the paramedics got there, they took Genesis and they tried to perform CPR on her. And we took her to the hospital. I rode with her.
Did you stay at the hospital that night?
Yes, I stayed all night. I didn't want to leave Genesis's side. When it got to around at 8 a.m., the treating physician came up to me and said that Genesis had slipped into a coma, likely due to some sort of poisoning. At that point, I knew I had to get Casey involved, and so I raced back to Peony Estates to go get Casey.
I believe defense counsel is making an objection. I'm not sure you're off mute, but just want to check. But I can see you trying to make an objection.
Can you hear me?
I can now.
Objection, Your Honor, as to hearsay to the statements of the doctor.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Mhm.
This statement is not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. However, this statement is being used for subsequent action, as after Miss Angel Rodriguez heard that Genesis Petrillo had fallen into a coma, that's when she had left the hospital to go get Casey, and that's where the rest of the actions of that day occurred.
Your Honor, if I may.
You may.
These statements specifically do not need to be offered to show the subsequent action. And if they're not offered for the truth of the matter, I don't see why they're being offered at all.
Can you just, if the witness could just repeat what the statement was?
Yes. Genesis had likely slipped into some sort of coma due to food poisoning.
Okay. I am going to sustain the objection as to the cause of the coma. However, I will allow the witness to testify that the decedent slipped into a coma for the purpose of her subsequent actions, but I will I'll sustain the objection as to the cause.
Thank you, Your Honor. Miss Rodriguez, what happened when you got back to Peony Estates?
I ran up to go get Casey and we rushed back to Genesis. When we got to the hospital, we had found out that Genesis had only died moments before. It was the saddest day of my life.
Miss Rodriguez, I'm so sorry for your loss. Now, did you ever tell anyone else about what had happened to Genesis that night?
No, that's the interesting thing. On my way to go get Casey, I ran into Harper Martini in the hallway, and Harper said to me, "Oh no, Genesis got poisoned. Go tell Casey. Casey needs to know." But I hadn't told anyone.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Rodriguez, you met Genesis and Casey in 2016 at a trivia night, correct?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
You said on direct that they were your very best friends.
Yes,
That you'd do anything for them.
I would, yes.
But after Genesis's death, you and Casey haven't been the same, have you?
Yes.
I want to talk about May 11th of 2019. That was the day of the bridal party. Genesis and Casey were in a fight that night, weren't they?
Yeah, there may have been some disagreements between the two.
Casey walked away from the table and you thought she looked upset.
Yes,
So you immediately went to comfort Genesis.
yes. I was worried about what had happened.
To be clear though, instead of comforting Casey, you went to comfort Genesis.
Yes, as Genesis was the only one left.
So you tried to get Genesis to talk to you, but she wouldn't.
Yes,
Later that night, you found Genesis throwing up in the hotel room.
I did, yes. I was really worried about Genesis.
And you stayed to take care of her, didn't you?
Of course I did.
Of course you did. Let's move on now to the rehearsal dinner. Casey and Genesis were supposed to be sitting at the sweetheart table in the middle of the room, right?
Yes.
But once again, Genesis was upset.
I'm not sure if Genesis was exactly upset. I mean, she was upset with what was going on with the situation, but I'm not sure exactly about if they were upset about the table or not.
Genesis decided to leave the table, didn't he?
Can you repeat the question one more time, please?
Yes, Genesis decided to leave that sweetheart table, didn't he? Didn't she?
I mean, we were all sitting together. Yeah.
But Genesis left her seat to come sit with you instead.
Yes, we were all sitting together, me, Casey, and Genesis and the rest of the party.
So later that night at around 10 p.m., Harper gave her speech.
She did, yes.
And she gave Genesis the wine.
Yes, she did.
Genesis poured herself a glass.
Yes.
Genesis offered some to everyone at the table.
Yes.
But you're the only one who accepted her offer, right?
Yes, I was the only one interested in trying it.
And when you drank the wine, you immediately spit it out.
Yeah, it was a really bad tasting wine. I didn't even swallow it.
So let's talk about what happened after Casey went to bed that night. Over the next 45 minutes, Genesis continued to drink that wine.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite catch that.
Yes, over the next 45 minutes or so, Genesis continued to drink the wine.
Yes.
And about an hour later, you and Genesis ordered tequila shots for the table.
I didn't actually order the tequila shots. Genesis did.
And it was only after these tequila shots that Genesis slumped over in her seat.
Genesis didn't drink any tequila shots that night.
So Genesis ordered tequila shots and didn't drink any?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
But it was after these tequila shots were ordered that Genesis suddenly slumped over in her seats.
Yes, it did happen after, but I did not see Genesis drink any of those shots.
And you took her to bed.
Of course I did. I was really worried. I've never seen Genesis act like this before.
You didn't stop and tell anyone where you were going.
No, I didn't.
You didn't stop and tell anyone you were worried.
I mean, I didn't want to worry anyone else. I mean, everyone was having such a great time that night. I didn't want to ruin the mood.
So you didn't tell anyone. And once you were alone, she started sweating and vomiting.
Yes.
And that's when you decided to call 911.
Yes, I decided to call 911 at the point when Genesis asked me to.
So you called 911 and you went to the hospital with Genesis.
Of course I did.
And you stayed at that hospital all night.
Yes, I mean, Genesis is my best friend. I would never leave them or any of my friends in a time of need.
It was you and Genesis alone together in that hospital all night.
Yes.
When you got to the hospital, you didn't call Casey.
No, I didn't want to worry Casey because Casey had so much on her plate for the wedding.
You saw that Genesis was very, very sick.
Yes.
And you didn't call his fiance to be there with her.
No, I didn't. I didn't want to worry Casey.
You didn't call Harper. In fact, it wasn't.
No, I didn't think the addition of Harper would help. Given the conflict between Genesis and Harper, I didn't think I should call Harper.
So it wasn't until the next morning when Genesis was in a coma, taking his last breaths, that you decided to tell Casey.
I honestly didn't know how bad Genesis was. At the point when she got into the coma, that's when I knew I had to get Casey.
So later that day, Genesis passed. And you said, when the doctor told you that Genesis had died, that was the most heartbreaking moment of your life, wasn't it?
Of course it was. I mean, I lost my best friend.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay, the witness is excused.
Thank you.
Plaintiff, are you ready to call your next witness? I think plaintiff, counsel, you may be on mute. Let me just check. No, I can't hear you. I can see you talking, but I can't hear you. Let's just make sure.
Can you see me, Your Honor?
I've got you now.
If it's all right with you, I'll be using my own co-counsels.
Okay. All right, you may proceed.
I can't hear you.
hear me now?
Yeah.
I apologize for all these technical difficulties, Your Honor.
That's okay. It's a new format for everyone. That's going to happen at some point to everyone. So no worries whatsoever.
Thank you for your understanding.
Sure.
Good morning. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Dr. Jimin Kwan.
Dr. Kwan, what do you do for a living?
I am Chief Emergency Physician at Rapid River Valley Hospital in Midlands.
What do your duties as Chief Emergency Physician include?
It's my job to quickly and accurately diagnose patients, as well with my team of doctors and nurses to order tests and make diagnosis. As well, any suspected toxins or poisoning cases I'm usually assigned.
Okay, doctor, before we get into the facts, I'd like to talk a little bit about you and your background. Where did you go to school at?
Got my undergraduate degree in chemistry from Georgia Institute of Technology, finished my doctorate at UNC Chapel Hill, and then completed my residency at Emory University.
Doctor, did you specialize in any kind of medicine?
Yeah, so some of my time spent at Emory was specializing in toxicology. As well in that field, I'm a published author and an established member of the toxicology community.
Okay, doctor. Now I'd like to talk about Mrs. Genesis Petrillo. How did you meet Miss Petrillo?
Miss Petrillo was brought into the emergency room along with her friend, Miss Angel Rodriguez, one night.
Did you observe any symptoms in her at first?
Yeah, so when she first came in, I noticed that she was sweating excessively, that her speech was slurred and her mobility was impaired to the point that we had to put her in a wheelchair.
Doctor, at this point, without telling us what your initial diagnosis was, did you have enough facts to make an initial diagnosis?
Yes, I did.
What method did you use to make your diagnosis?
It's a process we're taught in school called differential diagnosis.
Can you explain that for us just a little bit?
Sure. So basically, as we observe more symptoms in the patient, we can rule out some diagnosis and rule in others.
Doctor, are other doctors that you know of using this method?
Yes, it is standard in our field.
Thank you. So what was your first diagnosis of Miss Petrillo?
Based on my initial examination, as well as the story that Miss Rodriguez had said that Genesis had been drinking and then had deteriorated to the point that she collapsed on the bathroom floor, was my first diagnosis that she was suffering from alcohol poisoning.
In light of this diagnosis, what did you do next?
Well, we admitted Genesis into the hospital where we could run a more thorough examination and get some tests done.
Did you see anything in your more thorough examination that you may have missed in your first examination?
Yes, I did. So it was at this point that Genesis, who could barely speak, grabbed my shirt and pulled me in and told me that she was feeling stomach cramps and chest pains. And when I shined my flashlight into her eyes, I noticed that she was tearing excessively and that her pupils, which one would expect to be dilated because of alcohol poisoning, were actually contracted. As well, her pulse, which one would expect to be rapid but weak, was instead just slowed.
Okay, doctor. Now I'd like to talk about the test that you ran. Your Honor, permission to share Exhibit 5 to the screen.
Absolutely.
This exhibit is pre-admitted through stipulation 3 as well. Okay, doctor, do you recognize this test?
Yes, I do.
Which test is this?
This is one of the blood tests we ran on Genesis Petrillo.
What were the results of this blood test?
We found low levels of acetylcholinesterase in Miss Petrillo.
What does that tell you?
Well, acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme produced in the liver. When the liver metabolizes organophosphate poisoning, the levels of acetylcholinesterase drop. This is so closely correlated with organophosphate poisoning, that doctors can use it to conclusively diagnose organophosphate poisoning.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, doctor? I didn't quite hear it.
Yeah, so the low levels of acetylcholinesterase are important because acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme produced in the liver. When the liver metabolizes organophosphate, the levels of acetylcholinesterase drop. Because of that, doctors can use it to conclusively diagnose organophosphate pesticide poisoning in a patient.
Doctor, did this test take Genesis's blood alcohol concentration?
It did,
What was her BAC?
0.16.
Did that tell you anything medically?
Other than Genesis shouldn't be anywhere behind a steering wheel, no, 0.16 is not a result that could put Genesis's life in danger.
Okay, doctor. Now I'd like to talk about another of the tests you ran. Your Honor, permission to share Exhibit 6 to the screen. Pursuant to Stipulation 3, this exhibit is already pre-admitted into evidence.
Absolutely.
Okay, doctor, do you recognize this test?
Yes, this is the unknown poisons and toxins analysis we ran.
So what was tested with this?
2 samples, a blood test, and then a stomach contents test.
Let's talk about the blood test first. What did it tell you?
That the presence of isofenphos and ethanol were found. Isofenphos is a compound of organophosphate pesticide poisoning, and the ethanol came from the alcohol that Ms. Petrillo was drinking that night.
And doctor, what did the test of Ms. Petrillo's stomach contents find?
The exact same as the blood. Again, the presence of isofenphos, the organophosphate poisoning compound, was found, as well as ethanol, which comes from the alcohol Ms. Petrillo was drinking that night.
Now, at this time, doctor, did you have enough information to accurately diagnose Ms. Petrillo before she died?
I did.
What was that diagnosis?
My diagnosis that Ms. Petrillo was suffering from organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
After you made that diagnosis, what did you do?
Well, there is an antidote for organophosphate pesticide poisoning, so we began the checklist to administer this poison. Unfortunately, before I could administer the antidote, Ms. Petrillo fell into a coma and then died later that morning.
Thank you. No further questions.
Ross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Kwan. You're a member of a group called Doctors for Organic Solutions, correct?
Yes, I am.
And this organization strongly advocates any use of chemical pesticides, correct?
Yes, it does.
And in fact, you're not only a member of this organization, you're also on the board of directors.
I am, yeah.
And isn't it true that you hope that the outcome of this case may help ban the use of chemical pesticides?
Absolutely. Cases like today are a perfect example of how dangerous chemical pesticides can be, why I'm in favor of legislation being created or changed to help stop something like this from happening.
That's a yes to my question. You hope that the specific outcome of this case will help ban the use of chemical pesticides.
Yes.
I'd like to move on to your conclusions in today's case. You concluded that Genesis died from organophosphate poisoning, correct?
Yes, my final conclusion was that she died of organophosphate poisoning.
And you believe this to be from the wine that she drank the night before?
At the time, I didn't have that knowledge, but when the test from the wine bottle was done 2 days later, then yes, I did believe it was because of the wine that she drank.
You also found this from the toxicology report, correct?
Yes.
You didn't conduct this analysis yourself, did you?
No, we sent it to the lab.
And you also weren't present for this analysis?
It's what, it's why we have the lab. It's what it's for. And so no, I was not present for the analysis.
But you would also agree that it is possible that the wine was actually never contaminated, correct?
I mean, highly unlikely, but technically possible. The lab, the lab usually doesn't make mistakes like that, but I guess it is technically possible.
So that's a yes. It is a possibility that the wine was not actually contaminated, correct?
Yes.
So something else that Genesis might have eaten or drinking that night could have been contaminated?
Well, Mrs. Wyatt was unlikely because when we pumped her stomach that night, we tested the the contents of the stomach pump, and there was wine and then food contents. When we tested the wine, tested positive for isofenfos, that organophosphate poisoning compound. The food contents didn't test positive for isofenfos. So again, highly unlikely that's how it happened.
But it is possible that if Genesis did eat or drink something that was contaminated in the stomach, it could make the wine appear contaminated, correct?
Possibly, although, I mean, again, the food didn't test positive for it. Usually if that was the case, like you're suggesting, counsel, the food and wine would test positive. But since it was just the wine, we can be pretty certain that it was just the wine, although I can't say with 100% certainty that something, didn't happen.
So there's a possibility that something else could have made the wine appear contaminated.
Yeah, it is a possibility.
Now, I'd like to talk about what else you reviewed in coming to your conclusion, Dr. Kwan. You also relied on Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, correct?
I did.
So you're aware that Genesis ordered tequila shots the evening before she died?
Yes, but it's my understanding that Ms. Rodriguez never saw her drink those tequila shots.
But it is to your knowledge that that tequila specifically was never tested for organophosphate poisoning or for organophosphate compounds, was it?
No, it was not.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Then the witness is excused. And plaintiff, if you are ready to call your third witness.
Good morning, Your Honor. Can you see and hear me all right?
I can.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
My name is Miss Dani Francasio.
And Ms. Francasio, do you work?
Yes, I do. I established, run, and own Rosie and Pedro Winery, one of the premier wineries in Rapid River Valley.
Then are you familiar with Peony Estates?
Oh, of course. It's actually owned by one of my previous employees, Harper Martini.
And how did you and the defendant get along?
Well, at the time when she worked for me, she not only was a great manager, but I considered her family. Harper and her daughter, Casey. I was so happy to have them in my life.
And did this friendly relationship last between you and the defendant?
Well, it lasted for about 3 years until one day she comes into my office and has the absolute nerve that she was leaving to start her own winery. I mean, she took half my staff and she didn't consult me at all. The worst part was that I considered Harper family, and this was how she treated me.
And after the defendant quit, did you stay in contact with the defendant?
Of course, I wanted nothing to do with her, but she started emailing me with questions about her winery. She was having issues with pesticides. They were actually quite concerning.
And would you recognize those emails?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to share my screen to show Exhibit 17? All right, can you see this?
Yes.
And Ms. Francasio, what is this?
This is one of those, it's an email chain between me and Harper, and this is an email sent by me May 12, 2019.
Is this a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
Your Honor, plaintiff moves to put Exhibit 17 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
So admitted.
Now,
The second paragraph, what did you say to the defendant?
More importantly, you know pesticides are poisonous, right?
And now I would like to take a look at the last two sentences of this same email you sent to the defendant. What did you tell the defendant?
This is very serious. Someone could die.
All right, now I'd like to take us back a bit. Did you still have a relationship with Casey?
Of course I did. I mean, Casey had done nothing wrong to me, unlike his mom. And I also knew his fiance, Genesis Petrillo.
And have you seen the defendant and Genesis together?
Yes, I have actually, one time.
When was this?
This was July 2015 at my own winery, actually.
And what happened?
Well, Genesis was a frequent customer at my winery, Rosie and Pedro. So he was visiting one day and Harper storms in.
Then what happened?
She was completely set off. I mean, she comes in, she yells at Genesis at the top of her lungs. If you even try to take my Casey away from me, it'll be the last thing you ever do.
So after the defendant said to Genesis, if you even try to take my Casey away from me, it'll be the last thing you do. What happened?
Objection, asked and answered.
Counsel, can you rephrase the question?
Yes. So after the defendant said to Genesis, if you even try to take my Casey away from me, it'll be the last thing you ever do. What happened next, Ms. Francasio?
I kicked her out, of course. I banned her from my winery.
And was this the last you heard from her?
No, now she started calling me all the time, complaining about Genesis and the wedding. I mean, she would go on and on.
Your Honor, plaintiff offers 18 D&E pursuant to MRE 8036 and pursuant to 18F, the declaration of Roger Michaels, who is the custodian of these business records.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
So admitted.
Can you see this?
Yes.
And what is this, Ms. Francasio?
This is one of those voicemails that Harper sent me in January.
And Ms. Francasio, do you know when the wedding was?
Yes, I was invited actually. It was June 8th, 2019.
How many months was this before the wedding?
Well, this would be about 6 months before the wedding when she called me.
So let's take a look at the third line. What did the defendant say to you just 6 months before the wedding?
Genesis, yuck. I swear only one of us will survive this wedding. And the cellar pests are a pain.
Objection, cumulative.
Any response, counsel?
Cumulative to what regard?
Your Honor, the jury has access to this document, so Ms. Francasio does not need to read directly off of this document. It's already on the record for the jury to see.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
The stipulation permits evidence 1 through 10 into evidence and not 18 D and E. Therefore, the jury does not have access to these records, and therefore it is admissible pursuant to MRE 8036 and pursuant to 18F, which you have already agreed upon.
If I may respond on those grounds, Your Honor.
I agree with defense counsel that it does seem cumulative in order to have as this has now been admitted into evidence, and given the witness's interpretation of it. So I'll allow you to ask questions about the document, but I'll sustain the objection as to her reading directly from it.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Francasio, was this the last you've heard from the defendant?
No, she emailed me again, actually. It was another email it was just emails about Genesis complaining, and she even said that she would make a Genesis pesticide. It was horrible things, actually.
All right, Ms. Francasio. And now I would like to discuss another email sent. Permission to share the screen, Your Honor? And this is the other email that the defendant, another voicemail that the defendant sent to you. Is it true that the defendant said it's going to be me or Genesis, not the both of us? Were those words that the defendant told you in this voicemail just a month before the wedding?
Yes, she did tell me that a month before the wedding. It was horrible to hear. I mean, it was actually terrifying. She did tell me that, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Okay. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Francazio, you're the proud owner of Rosie and Pedro, correct?
Yes, I am. I pride
And
in
that's a,
it.
and that's a winery in Rapid Rivers Valley, right?
Yes.
And Harper Martini used to be an employee of yours.
Yes, she was.
In fact, you taught Harper most of what she knows, right?
Yes, I did. I mean, I pretty much raised her from the ground up.
And you were proud of what she accomplished while working for you.
I did, yes. I ended up promoting her.
Yeah, so you promoted her around 2 years later, right?
Yes.
But then in 2015, Harper betrayed you, didn't she?
Yes, she did. She left to start her own winery.
Yeah, she went into your office and she told you she was going to open up her own winery, right?
Yes, she did.
So not only did she leave, but she also took away half of your senior staff members, didn't she?
Yes, and she also just took away our relationship. We were great friends. I thought she would value family a lot more.
And you were so mad that when you handed her her final paycheck, you told her that you never wanted to see her again.
Yes, that is true.
So let's talk about what Harper did next. She opened up Peony Estates, right?
Yes.
And Peony Estates is a winery in Rapid River Valley, same as Rosie and Pedro, right?
Yes, it is. We're becoming a fruitful wine region.
And the opening of Peony Estates really hurt your business, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
Objection, Your
Sales went
Honor.
down for a bit.
Relevance to how the business of Peony Estates affected Miss Francazio's business. We are here to discuss a battery charge, whether or not Harper Martini, the defendant, poisoned a bottle of Cara wine, not how the defendant's business affected Miss Francazio's business. Therefore, this is irrelevant.
Counsel?
Your Honor, if I may proffer.
Briefly.
This line of questioning is going to show that Ms. Francazio has a grudge against Harper Martini because of how the opening of Peony Estates affected Rosie and Pedro. This goes to the credibility of the witness.
I'll allow it for purposes of establishing bias.
So Ms. Francazio, I'm just going to ask you again. Peony Estates is a winery in Rapid River Valley, correct?
Yes.
And the opening of Peony Estates really hurt your business.
It did for a time.
So by early 2016, your wine numbers were down, weren't they?
Yes.
Your visitor numbers were down.
Yes.
Staff morale was down.
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered. Opposing counsel has already made the point that Peony Estates had affected her business. I find it unnecessary for her to cumulatively ask these questions.
Counsel, any response?
Your Honor, I'm asking multiple different questions in order to prove the same point. However, the specific question that I just asked had not been answered previously by Ms. Francazio.
I agree with you, counsel. I'm going to allow it.
So Ms. Francazio, I'll ask you again. Staff morale was down, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you even had to take a 25% pay cut in order to keep your business running, didn't you?
Yes, I did, yeah. Anything to keep the business alive.
And this was all because Harper opened Peony Estates.
Yeah, that's naturally what happens when a competitor opens in the region.
So let's move on to the night of June 7th. You weren't at Peony Estates, were you?
No, I was not. I was invited to the wedding, but I did not attend. I didn't think it'd be appropriate.
So you didn't attend the rehearsal dinner?
No.
You didn't know what Harper was doing on June 7th?
I mean, I knew she was at the rehearsal dinner, but no, I didn't know exactly what she was doing.
You don't know what Genesis had to drink that night.
No, I did not. I wasn't at the wedding.
You don't know how much Genesis had to drink that night.
No,
You don't know who Genesis was with at the end of the night.
no, I
And
wasn't.
Miss Francazio, you don't know who Angel Rodriguez is, do you?
No, I've never met her now.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Francazio, you received 5 voicemails from the defendant, correct?
Yes, I did. As I said, multiple and multiple voicemails.
And you did not respond to any of these voicemails, correct?
No, I didn't, but I did listen to all of them.
Yes, and all of these voicemails were about Genesis Petrillo, correct?
Oh,
Your Honor, objection.
Basis counsel?
This redirect was not within the scope of my cross.
Any response, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. I am I'm rebutting the fact that that Ms. Francazio did not have any relation to the events in question.
I'm going to allow it because it was brought up on direct and to reaffirm, but keep it brief.
Yes, Your Honor. And Ms. Francazio, these voicemails were sent only a month before the wedding, correct?
yes, that is true.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions. May this witness be dismissed?
Is there any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
Okay. And then the witness is free to go.
Thank you.
All right. And does that conclude the plaintiff's case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor.
Great. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. I think we're doing well on time. All loss isn't for another hour and a half. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. Just please remember that the video is being publicly broadcast by YouTube live stream. So, make sure you mute your mics and turn your videos off. And so it's 11:29. So I'll see everyone back here at 11:34.
Your Honor, I
Yeah.
just have one quick question.
Absolutely.
At previous Zoom tournaments that we've gone to, there's been an option for breakout rooms for both plaintiff and defense respectively.
Okay.
If that's not an option here, that's fine. I just wanted to ask if that could be possible.
I mean, I have no objection to it whatsoever. I'm just not the most technically savvy. So, if you can tell me how to do it, I'm happy to do it.
Oh, sure. So on the bottom of your screen,
Yep.
toward the right, you should see an option that says breakout rooms if you're the host.
I am the host, I believe. No, I am not seeing breakout rooms.
In that case, Your Honor, it's fine. I'm sure we can figure something out. Thank you. Thank you so much for trying.
I apologize. If
It's fine.
there's some way, if you want me to try and work on it, I'm happy to do so. But
No worries. We can figure this out. This
All
stuff is all weird for us to get used to, honestly.
okay, great. Thanks so much. All right, so we'll do 11:35 then. Counsel, if you're checking your thing, I can't hear you yet. All right, everyone, I have 11:36. I just want to make sure that both sides are back online before we continue.
Yes, Your Honor, we're ready. The defense is ready to proceed.
Great. Is plaintiff side back?
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff is also ready to proceed.
Great. Okay, then the defense can call its first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Austin Lewis to the stand.
Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you. Please state your name for the court.
My name is Austin Lewis.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Lewis?
I manage and oversee the winemaking process at Peony Estates.
Do you know Harper Martini?
Yes, I met Harper shortly after I started my previous job at a winery called Rosie and Pedro. She is now my employer.
How did you come to be employed by Harper?
She offered me a raise and a stake in her new venture. I absolutely had to take her up on it. The fermentation process was extremely unprofessional at my previous job with Danny.
Now, how did you go about conducting the winemaking process at Peony Estates?
The first thing we do is we harvest the grapes from the vines. Peony Estates is on a slope, so our better, smaller grapes that make our finest wines are at the top of the slope, and our bigger, less high quality grapes grow at the bottom of the slope.
There have been allegations that it's possible pesticides got into the wine from the grapes that were on the bottom of the slopes. Is that true?
No, we take extra precautions to make sure that our grapes aren't infested with pesticides. I block off 20% of our grapes that are at the bottom of the slope, the flattest part, so that we can make sure that that doesn't happen. We additionally inspect the grapes at the bottom of the slope to make sure that they don't have any unsafe levels of pesticides, and we throw away those that do.
What do you do with grapes once you've picked them?
We crush the grapes and then we go through the fermentation process. And then once the grapes are fermented, we put them into the casks in our wine cellar to age them. Once they are aged to perfection, we bottle them.
Is it possible for pesticides to enter the wine during this process?
Absolutely not.
I want to speak more about pesticide use and storage on Peony Estates. Where did you store the pesticides?
I built a special storage shed about 600 feet away from the facility to store the pesticides.
Would you recognize a map of Peony Estates if it were shown to you today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to publish Exhibit 4 to the jury. I would like to remind the court at this time that this exhibit has been pre-admitted per the stipulations.
Sure.
Sorry, we're having technical difficulty publishing it.
That's okay.
Can you? Yes, sorry. Miss Lewis, can you identify what you see on the screen now?
Yes, Exhibit 4 is a map of Peony Estates.
Is this here the storage shed you were speaking of?
Yes, it is.
Now, by looking at this map, it seems that guests have access to the storage shed from the parking lot. Is that true?
Yeah.
Is there anything prohibiting guests from entering the storage shed from the parking lot?
No, I never thought to do anything.
Is there a lock on the storage shed?
No, again, I didn't think that, pesticides would be a hot commodity for Rapid River thieves.
What about video cameras? Are there any video cameras on the property that would show who had access to the storage shed?
No, I didn't think that would be necessary.
Were there any logs kept of who signed pesticides in and out of the shed?
No, I trusted my employees.
Were there any records kept of how many
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. These statements are out-of-court statements offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
Your Honor, if I may.
Counsel, can you just repeat the question before you answer?
Yes. Were there any records kept of the amounts of pesticides used before or the amount of pesticides before and after each use?
Okay. And your response to the objection?
Your Honor, there's no statement that's been elicited. I'm simply asking if there were any records kept.
Okay. Counsel, you can renew your objection once you hear something that sounds like hearsay. I agree that it could elicit hearsay, but until I hear the witness's answer, you're more than welcome to renew your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'll ask again, Ms. Lewis, were there any records kept of the amount of pesticides before and after each use?
No, there were not.
Was it possible for guests to access the storage shed at any time?
I guess so. We regularly show the storage shed on our tours of the facility, so our guests can feel confident when they take away a bottle of our wine.
Going along with that, did you give a tour on the day of June 7th or before then?
Yes, before then, after the wedding party arrived, I gave one of my standard tours.
I want to direct your attention now to the day of the wedding, the rehearsal dinner. Do you know what happened on June 7th of 2019?
Yes, that was the day of Harper's daughter's rehearsal dinner.
On that day, did you take any special precaution to prevent guests on the property from accessing the pesticides?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Miss Lewis. Can you see and hear me all right?
Yeah.
Please let me know if that changes at any point.
Okay.
Before you worked for the defendant, you worked for Francasio. That's correct?
Yes, I did.
Are you aware that Ms. Francasio testified against the defendant today?
No.
And you can't stand Ms. Francasio, can you?
Well, Francasio process was super unprofessional, and I didn't particularly.
Your Honor. Relevance.
Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. This is relevant. This is probative on bias. I am trying to establish that not only does Ms. Lewis have bias toward the defendant, but she also has bias toward Ms. Francasio, who is testifying against the defendant today. Therefore, this is relevant.
Your Honor, if I may be heard on those grounds.
Sure.
This witness has been sequestered, and further, she has testified that she had no knowledge that Danny Francasio was testifying for the plaintiff today. So therefore, she could have no bias in this case.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Briefly.
Pursuant to MRE 803, I'm only asking for Ms. Lewis's present sense perception, not whether or not she heard what was testified by Ms. Francasio, but that she's aware that Ms. Francasio was testifying today.
Your Honor, I'm not objecting to the question. I'm not objecting to hearsay under 803. I am simply stating that since this witness had no knowledge that Danny Francasio was testifying for the plaintiff, she could therefore have no bias against Danny Francasio in a way that's relevant to today's case.
So I I agree with plaintiff's counsel that it's a valid question to ask if she's aware of the testimony, whether the witness had testified. However, to the extent that it calls for the substance of that testimony, this witness has been sequestered, so we can't ask any questions about that. I will allow the question in a very limited scope. Whether she has any ill feelings towards Ms. Brancazio, and then let's leave it at that, because the bias against a witness on the other side is not necessarily relevant to the battery issue.
Yes, Your Honor. If I may proceed?
You may.
So the defendants left Rosie and Pedro to start her own winery, Peony Estates, right?
Yes, I believe so.
And the defendant took you with her, didn't she?
Yes.
And while at Peony Estates, the defendant gave you a substantial raise, didn't she?
I don't know if I would say substantial, but yeah, it was nice.
It was a 10% increase.
Mm-hmm.
And you would even describe the defendant as a close friend, correct?
Yeah, I would.
And now you own 10% of Peony Estates?
Yes, I do.
So if the defendant loses this case, you will lose both your job and a lot of money, correct?
Not necessarily. I mean, I could see why people wouldn't want to do business with Peony Estates after the case, but it's no guarantee that Peony Estates would suffer.
So Ms. Lewis, you are saying that it's possible for you to lose your job and potentially your stake in the company if the defendant loses, yes?
Yeah, I guess it is possible.
Now, Ms. Lewis, I would like to talk about the defendant's involvement in the events in question. You knew the defendant and Genesis Petrillo didn't get along, right?
Yeah, but I just kind of saw it as normal in-law stuff. I mean, no one ever thinks that anyone is good enough for their kid.
And the defendant told you she hated Genesis because she thought Genesis was a bad influence, right?
Harper has a habit to over-dramatize everything, but yeah, she did tell me that.
Now let's discuss the events from 2018 with an employee, Kirby Doolittle. It's true that in 2018, the defendant told you that one of Peony Estates' employees accidentally drank wine that had been contaminated with pesticides, correct?
That did happen, yeah.
And Mr. Doolittle only had a few sips, correct?
Correct.
But that almost killed him, isn't that right?
Well, yeah, pesticides in wine will probably do that.
And the defendant told you that it was impossible to taste or smell the pesticides mixed in the wine, didn't she?
Yeah, she had to look into what had happened. I mean, it was an incident in her facility, and yeah.
So the defendant was present during this encounter when the wine was mixed into the pesticide?
I'm not aware if she was or not.
But she told you that pesticides, that you couldn't smell the pesticide if it was mixed into the wine. And she also told you that you couldn't taste it.
Yeah, she did say that.
Right?
Objection, Your Honor. Compound question.
I believe the witness has answered it, so I'm going to allow it. It just make sure your questions are one at a time, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. So the defendant told you all of this, correct?
Yeah.
And the defendant was present the defendant was aware of this encounter, correct?
Yeah, she had to be. I mean, if someone gets, sick at your facility, you should probably be aware of it.
And the defendant, as owner of Peony Estates, has access to these pesticides, correct?
Yeah, pretty much anyone on the grounds does.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that this witness can remove herself.
Yep, the witness is excused. All right. And is the defense ready to call its next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Cannon to the stand.
All right.
May I proceed? Oh, thank you. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hi, I'm Dr. Riley Cannon.
And what do you do, Dr. Cannon?
I'm an associate consultant at Gardner Consulting Incorporated in California, and I specialize in pharmacology and toxicology.
And can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Yes, I received my bachelor's from The Ohio State University in 1990, and then I got my MD from Harvard Medical School with an emphasis in toxicology in 1996.
And what other experience do you have?
Well, after I got my MD, I was the chief toxicologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. And then in 2005, I moved to Midlands, where I was a professor in toxicology. After that, in 2014, I started working for Gardner's Consultants as an associate consultant.
So how are you involved in today's case?
I was hired by the defense to create an independent report on the death of Genesis Petrillo.
How exactly did you go about making this report?
Whenever I or anyone in my firm make a report, I use the medical comprehensive assessment.
And what is the medical comprehensive assessment?
The medical comprehensive assessment is just like the name. We look completely at our client's case and try to figure out any possible conclusions. And we look at medical documents from the day in question, past medical documents, witness statements, and anything else we deem necessary.
Is this a standard method for creating such a report?
Yes, it is.
And is it a reliable method?
Yes, it is.
And did you apply this method reliably today?
Yes.
And what facts and data did you use in your analysis?
I used Dr. Kwan's full report. I also used the toxicology report that Dr. Kwan requested. I used Genesis Petrillo's past medical documents and the analysis of the wine bottle from June 10th, along with the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez.
And was all of that sufficient to help you come to a conclusion in today's case?
Yes, it was.
So let's talk about your conclusions. What were your findings?
While I do acknowledge that Dr. Kwan's conclusions could be a possibility, I actually found 4 other possibilities that could not be ruled out. In particular, I'd like to talk to you about one today.
And so what is that other possibility?
I believe that there's a possibility that Genesis actually ingested the organophosphate pesticide through some other source. There's not enough evidence to rule out that something other than the Cara wine actually poisoned Genesis.
And why is that?
This is largely due to the process that the body goes through when digesting food and beverages. There's many chemical and mechanical stages that the food will go through in the stomach.
So in that digestive process that you just talked about, what happens first?
Well, first, the food goes into the stomach and the hydrochloric acid breaks down everything that went in, and this makes it into a liquid.
And so what happens next?
Well, next, a stomach enzyme called pepsin will continue to break down the stomach's contents even further, so that way it's an extremely well combined liquid.
So why exactly is this important to Genesis's case?
This is critical because due to the nature of the digestive system, everything we eat gets mixed together. Genesis's stomach contents were tested, and they found traces of wine and organophosphates, amongst other things.
So because of the process that you just outlined, is there a way we can know for sure where exactly the organophosphates came from?
No, not with complete certainty, because everything that Genesis ate and drank that night was mixed together and well combined at the time of the test. That makes it impossible to pinpoint exactly where the organophosphates came from. Additionally, there's no conclusive evidence from the tested bottle of wine.
What exactly do you mean by that?
The lab analysis from June 10th did report that there are high levels of organophosphates, however, which is the pesticide. But we can't conclude with complete certainty when those organophosphates entered the bottle.
Why can't we conclude that?
There are no tests that can tell us exactly when the bottle was contaminated. For example, the pesticides could have gone into the bottle after Genesis ingested the wine when it was thrown away. Due to the nature of this evidence and the lack of available testing, there's no definitive way to know how and when the pesticides got into the bottle.
So, Dr. Cannon, if Genesis were drinking something else, say tequila, the night before she died, how would that affect your conclusions?
It's possible, with tequila, it's a clear alcohol, making it so when it enters the stomach, it mixes in and it's even harder to detect. It's completely possible that the tequila could have been a vessel for the organophosphates.
So what is your conclusion about the source of the organophosphates in Genesis's systems?
It's completely possible that the organophosphates could have entered her system through something that was not the wine. Based on the stomach contents, it may have been something else that Genesis consumed that night and could have caused her death.
So, Dr. Cannon, with everything considered, what is your final conclusion about Genesis Petrillo's case?
While I acknowledge it is a possibility that this possibility is not without its flaws, it's important to acknowledge that it cannot be definitively ruled out. Because of this, we cannot with 100% certainty claim that the wine is what poisoned Genesis. In my many years of experience, I've actually found that sometimes the easiest answers is not always the correct one.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. I have no further questions at this time.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Cannon.
Good afternoon.
Before I begin, I'd like to verify that you can see and hear me clearly.
I can, thank you.
Should that change at any time, please let me know right away.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Doctor, before we talk about your conclusions, I'd like to talk about you a little bit. Now, you said that you work for Gardner Consulting, that's correct?
That is correct.
And one of Gardner's biggest clients is Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer, that's correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer is a manufacturer of pesticides and things that kill roaches and rodents, that's correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And before this case, the CEO of Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer called you, that's correct?
Yes.
And when he called you, he said that it was very important that organophosphate pesticides not be ruled the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. That's correct.
He did say this. However, I did not let that impact my conclusions at all. As I just said, organophosphates could have very well have been a cause of Genesis Petrillo's death.
Sorry, doctor, I'm going to need a yes or a no on this one. The CEO of Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer did call you and he did say that. That's correct.
That is correct. And as I said, it didn't allow me to change my results at all.
And doctor, you wouldn't want to lose Detsky as a client, you would agree?
I agree that I wouldn't want to lose them as a client. However, I must stay true to my findings, and I would not let them and their outsized opinions affect my findings at all.
Okay, doctor, now I'd like to talk about your conclusions and opinions. Now, if Genesis had directly ingested the pesticide, it likely would have burned her throat, that's correct?
That is correct,
yes. To be more specific.
Yes.
And there was no such burn.
That's yes, correct. There's no burns on Genesis's esophagus.
Now, if food had been contaminated with pesticide, everyone who ate that food likely would have suffered the effects of the poison. That's correct?
That is correct, yes.
And no one else suffered effects of a poison besides Genesis. That's correct?
That's correct, and it's possible that Genesis ate some or drank something that no one else did, which resulted in Genesis suffering from the poisoning.
Doctor, you'd agree with me that the most likely cause of Genesis Petrillo's death is organophosphates ingested from Harper Martini's wine. That's correct?
It is a possibility. However, it is not a possibility that is 100% certain. As I said, there were other causes that could not be ruled out.
Doctor, I understand that it's not a certainty, but I'm going to need a yes or no on this question. Harper Martini's wine containing organophosphate pesticides and killing Genesis Petrillo is the most likely cause of her death. That's correct?
Yes, it's one of the causes that could have caused it.
I understand it's one of the causes, but it's the most likely. That's correct?
Yes.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be allowed to step down.
Yes, the witness is excused. Then the defense can call its third witness.
The defense calls Harper Martini to the stand. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hi, my name is Harper Martini. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Harper Martini.
What do you do for a living, Miss Martini?
I'm the proud owner and sole founder of Peony Estates, which is a winery and bed and breakfast here in Midlands.
Why are you here today?
My son's fiance passed away about a year ago.
And your son is Casey Soto, right?
Yes, yes.
What is your relationship like with Casey?
Casey is the light of my life. I wanted only the best for him, even when he couldn't always see what that was.
What do you mean by that?
Casey could be pretty naive. As his mother, I know him better than anyone. And it's probably my fault, honestly. I tried to give him the world and protect him from anything that might hurt him. But often Casey would jump on opportunities without thinking them all the way through. He went to the first college that offered him admission. He joined the first fraternity that would speak to him. And Genesis was no different.
How was Genesis no different?
Well, Genesis was his first serious girlfriend. He'd get over the moon excited when Genesis would text or call, to the point where he was getting distracted from his studies. And when I met Genesis, Genesis didn't seem nearly as infatuated with Casey as he was with her. I could see it all happening. I had been in those shoes before, but Casey couldn't see it.
So what did you do about this?
Well, I talked to Casey lots of times. I tried to explain what I was seeing, that Harper's that the red flags that Genesis was showing were something that we should be taking into account. But Casey convinced me that his feelings for Genesis were real. And so I chose to move forward and try to trust Casey.
Did their relationship ever progress?
Yes, they got engaged. I still felt uneasy because I didn't really trust Genesis, but I continued to put my faith in Casey.
What was your relationship like with Genesis?
Wasn't great, especially with the wedding planning.
Let's talk about the wedding planning process. How did that process go?
Well, Genesis and I butted heads a lot. We had very different plans for what the wedding should look like.
Where exactly didn't your plans line up?
Genesis wanted the wedding to be in a different winery, and I wanted it at ours. I could pay for it if it was at our wedding. Casey had talked to me all when he was growing up about having this wedding at our winery. Also, Genesis was a recent grad student. Casey only worked at my winery. They didn't have a lot of money. And since they were moving to France soon, I thought it would be best for me to be able to fund the wedding. I could do that best from my winery.
So you mentioned a discrepancy in where they wanted to host the wedding. What did they end up doing?
They chose to have the wedding at my winery. I could pay for it. And once I told them that I would be funding the wedding, they seemed eager. It was Casey's dream to have this wedding, and I wanted to make sure it could become a reality.
Let's break down the nights leading up to the wedding. How did the rehearsal dinner go?
Honestly, far better than the wedding planning had led me to believe it would go. The event went seamlessly. Casey was smiling and laughing the whole time, especially during my toast.
Can you talk a little bit about this toast that you made?
I spoke about blending families and the importance of us kind of becoming one unit, and also how I saw the business being an opportunity for us to be able to blend that relationship. Specifically, I was giving Genesis her own bottle of wine because wine is really my love language, and I wanted to be able to communicate that to Genesis.
So why did you give Genesis that specific bottle of wine?
Well, the car wine was special for her because she enjoyed those seasonal flavors. I really wanted to have the best for Genesis, and so I brewed this wine specifically for her.
What did it mean to you to give that bottle of wine to Genesis?
Well, that was the final realization for me that what was best for Casey was for me to put my own feelings and about Genesis aside and just to trust Casey and have him handle this himself.
What did you do that night after you gave the toast?
I went back to bed at around 10:30, but before I really left the property, I realized I left my jacket in the kitchen. And so on my walk back, I saw something that confirmed all of my initial suspicions.
What did you see?
Well, I was walking down the hallway and I saw Genesis and Angel in this room by themselves. They door was kind of cracked so I could see what was happening. They were close. I didn't believe it with my own eyes when I first saw it, but they were kissing. I could smell the alcohol from outside. I mean, it just broke my heart.
Who is Angel?
Angel's a friend of Casey and Genesis.
And around what time did you see them together?
It was around 10:30, like almost right after I left.
And what did you do about it when you saw them?
Well, I couldn't be the one to break that news to Casey. I knew how heartbroken he would be, and I simply couldn't be the one to do it. So I told Genesis that if he didn't tell Casey before the wedding, I would, but I wanted to give Genesis that opportunity.
As far as you know, did Genesis ever tell Casey?
I don't think so. Shortly after that, I learned that Genesis was in a coma.
Let's talk about that night now. How did you find out that Genesis was in a coma?
Angel Rodriguez called me and told me.
And how did you react when you heard that the love of your son's life was in a coma?
I was furious. I simply couldn't believe that Angel had been with Genesis all night and hadn't told either Casey or I that Genesis was in this kind of condition. She had been with Genesis since I saw them at 10:30 that night, and we didn't hear about it until the morning, at 9 a.m. the next day, almost 12 hours later. It was, I couldn't believe that Angel would do that to my son.
Who eventually broke the news to Casey?
Well, Casey and I were together when Angel called. Casey rushed there right afterwards, as soon as Angel called.
And how did he respond to this situation?
Casey was inconsolable, as one would imagine. He became a shell of the person that he was.
And Miss Martini, who was the last person you saw with Genesis that night?
It was Angel.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Oh, Miss Martini, can you see and hear me okay?
Totally fine.
And can you let me know if that ever changes throughout this examination?
Yes, I will.
Now, Miss Martini, Casey was the light of your life, right?
Absolutely, my only child.
Yeah, he was your only son?
Yes, my only child.
And you thought that your son was almost perfect.
Yes, as everyone thinks that their son is.
But the only flaw about your son was that they were dating Genesis Petrillo.
Yeah, Genesis wasn't a good person, wasn't right for Casey.
You believe that Genesis was a bad influence on Casey, right?
Yes, like I said, Casey could be pretty naive, and so Genesis was able to talk him into a lot of things.
Genesis even talked Casey into drinking too much one night when they were dating, right?
Yeah.
And Casey went to the hospital and got very sick.
Yeah, of
This must have worried you.
course.
And then you and Genesis just didn't get along after that, did you?
No, not particularly.
But Casey wanted you guys to get along, right?
So I did my best for Casey's sake. I tried to take Genesis out to lunch, tried to meet her in the middle. Yeah, so I tried.
Yeah, in fact, one of your ways of trying to connect with Genesis was to host a party, a pre-wedding party, right? And at this party, you overheard Genesis talking with Casey, right?
Yes,
They were discussing the plans of the wedding.
yes.
They were discussing possibly moving the wedding back to Rosie and Pedro's.
Yeah, this was before we had really cemented that it would be at my winery. And so, yes, I heard that they were discussing it being somewhere else. That's when I intervened and told them that I would be willing to fund the wedding so that they could have more money for France.
But this made you angry, right?
Yeah, I really didn't understand why they would be that irresponsible with their money in that way. I was willing and had the money and the place to fund the wedding. I didn't understand why it wouldn't be at our winery.
In fact, you were never angrier in your life when you found out they were considering going to your opponent's bar.
I mean, it was that they were going somewhere other than my own winery. It just didn't really make any sense to me.
Now, I'd like to talk about your later conversations with Genesis. You received a phone call from Genesis once, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And Genesis left a voicemail.
Yes.
And in this voicemail, Genesis told you that him and Casey were going to France,
Yes.
that they were leaving you behind.
Well, I don't think that they'd want to take me with them. Having your mother-in-law on your honeymoon isn't really the vibe.
But no, they were going to move to France.
Yes, yeah, my understanding was.
Your Honor, facts not in evidence.
Counsel?
Your Honor, may I respond?
Mhm.
I'm just asking the witness about her knowledge of a phone call she received.
If I may respond.
Mhm.
Your Honor, this phone call is outlined as a piece of evidence, and counsel has not entered this piece of evidence for the jury to examine.
Your
Okay.
Honor, may I respond?
You may.
I'm not going into specifics of what was said. I was just going into the broad idea of what the voicemail was about. I'm not quoting specifically from the document.
Okay, but there is a document.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, is that something you intend to enter into evidence?
We were not going to, but we can.
Okay, would counsel have any objection to that document being entered?
No, I would not.
Okay, why don't we enter that as an exhibit so that everyone can see the contents, and then I'll allow the witness to testify further to it.
Your Honor, may you give me a moment to pull up the exhibit?
Absolutely. No problem.
Oh, Ms. Martini, this is the voicemail you received from Genesis, correct?
Yes, yes, it is.
Now, in this voicemail, it says, "I'm going to Paris after the wedding. You'll never see me again."
Yes, that's what it says.
And it says, "Oh, there's a catch. Casey is coming with me, of course."
Yes, that's what it says.
And it says, "Casey, me, and our future kids, your grandkids, will all going to live our lives as far away from you as possible."
Yes, that's what it says. It's my understanding that Genesis was being a little bit dramatic here when I spoke with Casey.
Your Honor, cumulative. I'm sorry, I tried objecting earlier. I'm not sure if my sound was on. You're also muted, Your Honor.
Oh, thank you. You're objecting to it that it's cumulative?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I respond? This is not cumulative because I'm highlighting certain sentences in this transcript. Although this is admitted into evidence and can be viewed, this is cross-examination, and I'm asking and confirming specific statements to make sure that Harper Martini heard these specific statements when she received this email.
I'll allow it.
Now, Ms. Martini, just ask you again. It says, "Casey, me, and our future kids, your grandkids, we're going to live our lives as far away from you as possible."
Yeah, that's what it said. It honestly broke my heart that Genesis would threaten me with my grandkids like that.
She also said, "You treat us all so bad. Find someone else to run your sad little winery. Casey doesn't want it. No one wants it. You will die alone at that sad place, and no one will care."
Yeah, that's what Genesis said to me.
Now, besides receiving this, you also wrote a note to Genesis, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, permission to share my screen and share Exhibit 24?
Yes.
Oh, Ms. Martini, this is this note, correct?
This is a note that I wrote, yes.
And it is clear and accurate copy of the note?
Yes. I'm sorry, could you, yes, it is a copy of the note.
Sorry, I think you cut out.
Sorry. Yes, it is a copy of the note.
And it hasn't been changed or altered in any way since you last wrote it?
No, it has not.
Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to admit Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
It's so admitted.
Now, Ms. Martini, in this note, you say that you need Genesis to be out of your life, right?
Yeah, I mean, she was cheating on my son, so I did think that she needed to be out of our lives.
You said to leave Casey, and the enclosed $300,000 is yours.
Yeah, the winery had been doing really well this year. I had a lot of money, and it was worth spending it to get Genesis out of our lives. I mean, she had been cheating on my son for who knows how long. She needed to be gone.
And so you did not want this wedding to happen at all?
No, I wanted Casey to come to that conclusion that the wedding shouldn't happen.
And if Genesis did not take this money, you said you will take her out of the picture the hard way.
Yes, that's what I said. I'd have to communicate more with Casey.
Ms. Martini, Genesis passed away on June 7th, correct?
Yes, she did after spending the night with Angel.
And you told Genesis in this letter that she will have till the 7th to make her decision, right?
Yes, I'm sorry. I believe that Genesis actually done on the 8th, but yes, that is what I said. The day before the rehearsal.
Now, Ms. Martini, I'd like to talk about that night. You left the party early after gifting Genesis a bottle of wine, correct?
I left around 10:30. That was when things were winding down.
And you woke up at 2:30 a.m. to a phone call from Austin Lewis.
Yes, I did.
Lewis said someone had been sent to the hospital, right?
Yes, I assumed it had been Genesis. She'd been drinking all night. Genesis had ended up in the hospital from that kind of thing before, over drinking. So that was where my first thought went.
And you were in trial today when Angel Rodriguez testified?
Yes, I was.
And you heard Angel Rodriguez state that she saw you carrying a bottle of pesticide toward the kitchen.
I'm not sure exactly when that happened. That's what she said, but yes.
That you referred to Genesis as a pest?
Yeah, I don't remember that happening, but I wouldn't have been surprised. I try to make jokes. They don't always land.
You also heard Danny Francasio testify today, correct?
Yes, I did.
And Danny Francasio said that you had sent her an email calling Genesis a pest as well.
Again, a joke that doesn't land well.
Now, you use this pesticide to kill pests, right?
Literal pests, cockroaches. The pesticide works on cockroaches, yes.
Yes, and this pesticide has isofenfos in it.
I believe so. I don't remember the chemical off the top of my head.
And isofenfos is a form of organophosphate.
I believe that's correct, yes.
And you were here when Dr. Jim and Kwan testified today?
Yes, I was here.
Dr. Kwan said that Genesis Petrillo had died from organophosphate poisoning.
Yes, I mean, there are pesticides all over the winery. We use them to get rid of cockroaches. Although we never had them near the food or near the wine, they were pretty prevalent on the property.
But you do use this pesticide to kill pests. Am I correct?
Cockroaches, yes. Use it to kill cockroaches.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor. Ms. Martini, you were asked about this note that you wrote to Genesis, correct?
Yes, I was asked.
Let's break that down a little bit. Did you intend, by the words, you will regret your decision, along the lines of that you said on the note, did you mean for that to come across as, I will kill you if you do not take the money?
No, never. I simply meant that if Genesis wouldn't leave, that I'd have to resort to talking to Casey more, to tell Casey about what I suspected with Angel and Genesis. I really didn't want to have to do that. I didn't want to have to break Casey's heart with the news about Angel and Genesis, but if Genesis didn't leave, I would do that. That was the hard way.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
All right, are there any further matters for the defense's case in chief?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests.
Okay, great. Then at this point, we are now going to, is everyone ready to proceed with closing arguments, or would you like a brief 5 to 10 minute break to prepare?
The defense requests a quick 10-minute break to prepare for closing arguments, if that's okay.
Yep. Is the plaintiff amenable?
Yep, that's all right with us.
Okay, great. So I have, so we'll say back here at 12:30. Okay, just want to make sure everyone is back online.
Yes, Your Honor.
Great.
Defense is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Okay, great. And then if we could hear closing statements, as long as we're ready. So if everyone could switch back to speaker view, that way we are good to go. Plaintiff, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. Can you hear and see me okay?
I can.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. A mother's love knows no bounds. We've heard through today's trial about Harper Martini's love for her son, Casey Soto. Ms. Martini described that her son was the light of her life. She would do anything for her son. And that her son's only flaw was their fiancé, Genesis Petrillo. Now, Ms. Martini did not like Ms. Petrillo. Ms. Martini thought Genesis Petrillo was dangerous and was afraid for her son's health and safety. Now, today, the prosecution has the burden of proof. We have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt, by a preponderance of the evidence, that Harper Martini is liable for the charge of battery. And to do this, we have to prove two things. First, we have to prove motive. That Harper Martini had a motive to kill Genesis Petrillo and poison Genesis Petrillo with a bottle of Cara wine. And second, we have to prove to you that the bottle of wine containing the osteophosphate poisoning was what indeed killed Genesis Petrillo. Now, I'd like to highlight these two key parts of the battery charge, so when you go back into the deliberation room, members of the jury, you will be confident and you will find Harper Martini liable. Now, first, I'd like to address the cause of death and what caused Genesis Petrillo's life to end. Today, the plaintiff called Dr. Jimin Kwan to the stand. And Dr. Jimin Kwan gave you several pieces of evidence proving that it was indeed osteophosphate poisoning that killed Genesis Petrillo. First, he provided a sample, several samples that shown that this poisoning was inside Genesis Petrillo's system when Genesis Petrillo died. Now, I'd like to discuss the motive. In today's case, several motives have been thrown out and shown that Harper Martini indeed had the most motive to kill Genesis Petrillo and get her out of her life. Now, the defense has come up today and they told you in their opening statement to follow Angel Rodriguez. Follow her and you will find the truth. And frankly, I agree. Now, we heard in Angel Rodriguez's statement that she saw Harper Martini carrying the bottle of pesticide. And when she asked about why Harper Martini was carrying these pesticide, she said that it was because Genesis was a pest and it was for Genesis. Right after this incident occurred, Angel Rodriguez saw Harper Martini gift a bottle of Cara wine, a different bottle than any of the other wines that were received by any of the other guestmates at the wedding. And she also saw Genesis drink out of this bottle of wine. In Dr. Cannon's cross, you heard her say that Genesis must have drinking something that no one else did. And that is right. Genesis drank the bottle of Cara wine. The bottle of Cara wine that Genesis offered to everyone, but no one took it. The one that Angel Rodriguez spit out because it tastes so poorly. That is what Genesis drank that no one else did. Now, it was highlighted today that tequila shots could have been the cause of death, but members of the jury, this is simply not the case. You heard from Angel Rodriguez that Genesis had ordered these tequila shots, but did not drink them. In fact, Angel drank Genesis's shot for her. and you heard Angel say this on her direct. You also didn't hear from anyone who saw Genesis Petrillo drink tequila shots on the night in question. Now, after this bottle of Cara wine was consumed, Angel brought Genesis to her room, and that's when Genesis went downhill and ended up dying. Now, Harper Martini had the motive to do this to Genesis. You heard on Harper Martini's cross that Genesis Petrillo had sent her a phone call saying that she was going to take her only son away from her and bring her across the world to Paris, even threatening to not allow Harper to see her grandchildren. Now, a mother's love knows no bounds. Definitely, as she said before, broke her heart. She also thought that Genesis was a bad influence on Casey, forcing Casey to drink so much alcohol one night that Casey almost died. And finally, you heard Harper Martini say that she wanted nothing more than for the wedding to end. And to do this, she offered Genesis a note stating to take $300,000 and leave. She was willing to spend that much money to keep her daughter to herself. But members of the jury, Genesis took this money and stayed. And that is why Miss Martini decided to make her disappear the hard way. Miss Martini gave Genesis until the 7th, June 7th, to make her decision. And it was that night on June 7th that Miss Martini had gifted Genesis the bottle of wine, the wine that only Genesis drank and no one else did. And the night that Genesis was sent to the hospital and died. Now, at the conclusion of today's trial, I am confident that you will be able to find Harper Martini liable by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning that Harper Martini, more than likely than not, was liable for the battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Do we have a closing statement from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed when you're ready.
Angel Rodriguez was in love with Genesis Petrillo. It was the night of the rehearsal dinner for Genesis and Casey. This was finally going to be their big day, their special moment that everyone waits for their entire lives. We all know how that feels. But that day never happened for Genesis and Casey. Angel was selfish, and she wanted Genesis all for herself. Angel went from passion to pesticides. She didn't want the wedding to go forward, so she tried making Genesis sick enough to not make her own wedding. But it went too far. And now the plaintiff is trying to frame Harper for Angel's mistake. Let's start with the defense story. Austin Lewis told you that there's no way the pesticides could have gotten into that bottle of wine. That wine bottle had an airtight seal, and there was no chance that the grapes were contaminated. However, what you did hear was that the empty bottle of wine was found in a trash can. The trash can that held an open pesticide container. Now, open wine bottle, open pesticides, of course there's going to be pesticides found on that bottle. But they can't prove where it came from. The pesticides couldn't have gotten into that bottle before the bottle made it to the trash can. Their timing is all off. But Dr. Cannon explains the timing in his testimony. He explains that nobody tested the tequila that Genesis drank. And you heard from Angel Rodriguez that it's only after the tequila that things started to go downhill for Genesis. Then, when Angel finally calls 911, she hides everything from the groom because they shouldn't have been together in the first place. They are the reason that Genesis is in the hospital. And Angel doesn't tell them about the tequila because she has something to hide. Angel failed to disclose the fact that they were drinking tequila to the doctors. She didn't tell them that on top of the wine, Genesis had taken shot after shot after shot of tequila. And you heard from Harper that she caught them on the night of the rehearsal dinner being intimate. And it broke her heart. But she didn't want it to break her son's heart. Today, you heard the plaintiff try to convince you that Harper Martini was responsible for Genesis Petrillo's death. They had to do this by a preponderance of the evidence, which means that it had to be more likely than not that Harper intended to poison Genesis. Not possibly likely, not equally as likely, but more likely than not that Harper intended this. Let's walk through the holes of the plaintiff's theory. First, they called Angel Rodriguez, a good friend of Genesis and Casey. You heard that Angel was the last person to be seen with Genesis. That person was with her all night, alone. And that night, Harper caught them kissing in a corridor. The night before Genesis and Casey's big day. Then you heard from Dr. Kwan, the chief emergency physician at the hospital that Genesis was rushed to. But what's most interesting about Dr. Kwan is that he sits on the board of directors for an anti-pesticide organization. His whole job is to tell you how bad pesticides are and how easily they can contaminate food. You heard in Dr. Cannon's analysis that he found not one, not two, but 4 other possibilities for Genesis's death that Dr. Kwan didn't even consider. He chose to focus on the pesticides, and that's all he talked about. Dr. Kwan even admitted on cross that the wine may not have been poisoned. Finally, they brought Danny Francasio to the stand, the owner of Rosie and Pedro's winery. Ms. Francasio has a personal agenda against Harper. Harper opened up a winery in the same town as his. She stole all his employees to create this winery. She stole all her customers for this winery. And she brought down staff morale so low that Ms. Francasio had to take a pay cut in order to keep her business running. And she'll do anything she needs to get back at Harper. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, look at the story the plaintiff painted you. They told you that Harper Martini intended to poison Genesis Petrillo, the love of her son's life. They told you in the beginning that a mother's love knows no bounds. And they're completely right. That's why, despite disapproving of Genesis, Harper did everything she could to build a relationship with her. She wanted her son to be happy more than anything. The plaintiff's story simply doesn't make sense. And today, they did not prove to you that it is more likely than not that Harper intended to poison Genesis. That's why I'm asking you to find Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel, and thank you, everyone. Am I correct that there's no rebuttal?
Yeah, there is a rebuttal, Your Honor.
Okay, and do you just reserve your remaining time?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Then go ahead.
Can you hear and see me all right?
I can.
defense just got up in front of you and told you that it was Angel. But Angel has no motive. Harper Martini was conveniently the only one who saw this interaction between Angel and Genesis occur. And Harper Martini was the one who wanted Genesis gone. Harper Martini said, "Leave this family and save us the headache, otherwise I'll make you disappear." Harper Martini said, "Take the money and leave, or I'll make you disappear the hard way." Harper Martini disliked Genesis Petrillo. Harper Martini knew where pesticides were stored, and Harper Martini knew that pesticides were dangerous. That is why I'm confident that you will find Harper Martini liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Okay, so we're just going to ask everyone to stay on while we submit the ballots. And then once we have the all clear that the ballots are properly submitted, then we will come back on and just do some brief commentary. All right, so if everyone could just hang tight. And Amanda, if you just want to let me know when you have submitted your ballot, I can let the tournament moderators know as well.
Will do. Thank you.
Great.
Erica, I've submit my ballot at this point.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. I will let the moderators know as soon as I submit mine. All right, everyone, just letting you know the ballots are submitted. So we're just going to hang tight and wait for the tournament staff to make sure that everything's properly done. And then they will be back on to give us a heads up, and then we'll give commentary. Okay, everyone, we are all set. Just got the all clear from the tabs room that our ballots are good, so we can give some brief commentary if you guys would like it. Awesome. Okay, so I can start. So I just to introduce myself, I'm Erica Oates. I am a Wake Law graduate. I used to coach the Wake Law team, or the Wake undergrad team, sorry. And I am now an attorney. I do civil litigation in Connecticut. So this is really fun for me to get back and kind of see everyone and, you know, be involved in this. So I thought both teams did an excellent job. This is definitely a case that's pretty even-handed, I thought, in terms of the issues. So I think my biggest takeaway is, one, you know, make sure that you know your rules of evidence cold. I know it's really easy to spout off the numbers, but just make sure you listen. And this is like a global commentary for the attorneys. Just make sure you listen to what the objection is so that you can respond in turn. Witnesses, I thought you guys had great character development. It was really difficult to kind of assess between the Angel and the Harper. You know, neither of you really seemed like you were plausible that you could, you know, poison someone, which is always a good thing. So that's great character development. You know, you guys did a really good job. You had really thoughtful objections. And so I was impressed all around. So.
Are you done, Erica?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, just a few general comments from me as you move through the competition. Be careful in arguments. I do not believe that the evidence XYZ or I think. Remove yourself from that and just talk about the evidence itself. Oh, and I should introduce myself. I'm sorry. I'm Amanda Manzano. I'm a 3L at Wake Forest. I'm on the national trial team there. And after graduating, I'll be in the Bronx DA's office. So remove yourself from evidentiary arguments. After the judge rules on an issue, don't thank the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. I think some of you, it's just like a reflex or a habit, but you can just say, yes, Your Honor, or just go ahead and proceed. I thought you all did a great job. You're all very poised and confident in your questioning. I was impressed that the plaintiffs were able to get that Harper Martini note. That's a very damning piece of evidence. It looks terrible. Defense, if that comes in, explain it away the best that you can. And then as far as the themes, a mother's love knows no bounds. Be careful because that got flipped on you. So just make sure that your interpretation of that theme is the stronger impression that's made. And then it all comes back to Angel. I took that from the plaintiff's opening. I would have liked to see that come back more in the plaintiff's closing, or excuse me, from defense opening. I'd like to see that come back more in defense closing. Just really, you know, have us hating on Angel in the end there. But great job to all of you. Really well done.
And do you guys have any questions, anything like that for us? No? All right. Awesome. Great job, guys. And good luck moving forward. So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.